Today's podcast is brought to you by Eddie. Find better candidates, conduct more focused interviews, and make data-driven hiring decisions. Hire Eddie, hire faster, hire smarter, hire more. Learn more at eddie.com. Now, let's podcast. Welcome to Disrupt Salt Lake City. My name is Jared Ellison, and I am joined today by Anna Smith, the Managing Director of Mindfulness Utah, and Adrian Ellison, the Chief Relationship Officer at Master Metabolic. How are you guys doing today?
Doing great.
Fantastic.
Thank you guys so very much for joining us. Today's podcast, we really want to explore how traditional corporate health and wellness plans have changed and evolved. And I keep personally hearing all over the internet about mindfulness. Now, I don't know what mindfulness is, and I want to know, so I have found the two leading experts of mindfulness to talk a little bit about it. So, Anna, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're a mindfulness expert? I mean, Mindfulness Utah is Anna Smith. So talk to us a little bit about what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. So Mindfulness Utah, as you mentioned, is my company, and we traditionally have worked kind of in the healthcare space, working with people who have chronic illness or terminal diseases or things that they can't really fix the pain or fix the illness, but maybe we can help them to cope with it better. And so mindfulness has been around, kind of started into the market and into academia about 40 years ago. And in that time, we have started to branch out into the kind of the workplace. And so looking at, how can mindfulness benefit law firms, and how can mindfulness benefit venture capitalists, and how can mindfulness benefit people outside of the healthcare setting. And so at Mindfulness Utah, we try to look at some of those target populations that might be experiencing higher levels of stress, being very distracted in their lives, having super full lives that require a lot of multitasking, which, as we have learned recently, is really bad for you and actually is not efficient. And so we focus a lot on working in group settings and one-on-one settings with clients to help increase their mindfulness, and then as kind of related to that, decrease stress, increase productivity, creativity, and that sort of thing.
Cool. Adrian, talk to us about Master Metabolic.
Yeah, so I think where mindfulness fits in with this is that, we all got into the fitness industry because we wanted to transform people. And like everyone else in the fitness industry, we're looking at all of the data and looking at all of the products and the services that up to this point haven't really worked that well. And there's just an abundance of information out there as far as what to do physically, what to eat, what to do with exercise. And yet there's a very small percentage of people actually finding success. And so really what it boils down to in my conversations with my clients is what's going on in here, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's really interesting because I spend most of my time talking to people about things completely unrelated to nutrition and exercise, that really just planting seeds, right? I want them to be mindful, but they're paying to get nutrition and exercise advice. Yet I know that the seeds that I'm planting about going home and taking some time for yourself, or recognizing when you're reaching for something in the pantry, or you're reaching for stimulation, go to that space. What are you trying to run from, right? And practice that mindfulness in that space, or especially if you have a lot of kids, right? And it's just noise constantly. I understand how that will affect their results because they're going to be distracted. They're going to make more mistakes. They're going to be less inclined to want to eat the things that we've written for them, or go to the gym because they're really looking for, like I said, that stimulation source outside of what it is their obligations are. So
you said something I think is really interesting, that you're trying to find the issues and you're not really focusing specifically about mindfulness or the person, but like the issues behind it. And right. I think there's a lot of similarity that we have between HR as well, because I have noticed that as benefit brokers and other companies come in trying to help an organization with their employees, the conversation is not about the services they offer. They're about the employee experience and the culture and the other issues within the business, and then that directs them into fixing those problems that they have, like retirement plans and other items. So I think that's really cool that we're kind of all trying to collectively, work together to help people be better and, hack into their brains and become smarter. Is that fair or no?
Totally.
Yeah, I would say hacking the brain and hacking the body to be able to be just...
And maybe smarter is not the word, but maybe just more evolved, like more integrated.
I like that.
In everything that they're doing, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
So Adrian, question for you. I mean, you've been involved in the world of corporate health and wellness and helping people transform. Personally, I feel like I've seen this evolution go from diet and exercise and Biggest Loser competitions, and those fads I feel, come and go. And then it has become more of this personal wellness and focusing on the issues in life that impact employees from being distracted from work, things like retirement and financial savings. And so I've seen a lot of trends within the HR industry that have been involved in financial freedom and in some other areas, Dave Ramsey courses and so forth. But I keep hearing about mindfulness now. It feels like it's the new trend and the new thing that's going to happen within corporations as it comes to health and wellness. But talk to us a little about your experience in seeing this evolution of health and wellness in the workplace.
Yeah, I really see it from a very outside perspective. I'm not in it, so in the thick of it, I'm really like the other guy. So when companies don't want to purchase corporate wellness services, or maybe they already have one and nothing's really happening, I'm the person that they call and they say, hey, you want to come in, you want to speak to our company about some specific topics, see if maybe some of our employees want to become clients, want to better that on a personal level outside of work. We can't really do anything else for them here, but we need to make a change. So I just see that happening all the time. And so I don't see like a ton of evolution as far as, it's been very directed on specific topics. Like I've talked about before, if there's a new fad that's out, of course they're going to gravitate towards that because they're really leveraging people's excitement and their ignorance, right? And so they're going to push things, supplements, telling people to take their vitamins, but that's very broad. I mean, there's so many vitamins in the world that are completely pointless, and you're telling your employees to take vitamins, and there's no metric for it. Mm-hmm. So you're telling people to do something, but there's zero measurement. And because of that, if you can't quantify what you're doing, how long do you do it? Not very long, right? Which is why a lot of people drop off their nutrition and exercise programs when they don't have a coach, because they don't, they come in, their weight's the same. They don't know the variables in the body. So they're just like, well, something's not working. I'm done with this. And I think it's the same thing when corporate wellness introduces these new concepts. There's no way to really actually measure the value of it and to have conversations about it. Okay. So that's what I see.
Okay, so we're starting to see businesses come in and do things like company yoga classes. And you're both certified yoga instructors. Yep. So that's pretty cool, and there's some fun things that are happening there that are coming from the outside in. But tell us about mindfulness. What is it? Why should HR professionals pay attention, and why should corporations care about mindfulness for their employees?
Yeah, well, that's a very big question. But I would say as it relates to yoga, and relates to the previous question just about, how do companies take care of their employees and provide competitive, wellness benefits for their employees. It's interesting because I think we've come at it historically from more of like a piecemeal perspective of, oh, shoot, we've got some financial stuff we need to address. Oh, shoot, we've got this obesity thing we need to address. Oh, shoot. And I think as we're seeing the evolution of health and wellness, we're starting to have more of a systems perspective of, all of these things are interconnected, and it's a network. We are a network. We are a system. Each individual employee, and then the collective whole, and then the teams that exist within that. And so understanding how we can address the system, and I think that's where mindfulness comes in, is that, we can try and put people on these Biggest Loser competitions. We can say, hey, there's a yoga class offered every Tuesday, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if we don't get at the heart of behavior change, of like, what does it take to actually change behavior? It's not dangling a carrot in front of someone's face. Maybe that works for a short term, like Adrian was saying. But really, if we want to fundamentally change the way that people are in our companies and maximize sort of their output and creativity and their engagement and fulfillment in their jobs, we really have to go to the heart of it. And that's where I think mindfulness comes in. And mindfulness as a practice essentially is, and you can practice it formally or informally, but essentially all you're doing is becoming the driver of your life rather than reacting to every moment and being, I think Tim Ferriss called it a walking reaction. Yes. And instead of being a walking reaction, you are consciously making decisions. You're observing what's happening objectively. You are consciously interpreting it and saying, okay, I recognize that I don't like this, or I do like that, or I want that, or I don't want that. And based on that reaction, right, based on that interpretation, maybe I would get angry and maybe I would fly off the handle. But because I'm aware of what's happening, I'm aware of how I interpret it, I am now going to make a better decision. I'm going to decide, yes, I know I don't want to go to that yoga class because I've never done yoga before. I'm going to look weird and it's going to be embarrassing and I don't even know. They're going to make me stand on my head. But I recognize all of that anxiety and nervousness, and I'm going to go anyway because I want to try something new. And I know that I have super high anxiety levels, and my work is suffering because of that. And so I'm going to try this, right? And so you're really able to say, I see what's going on inside of my mind and inside of my body at any given time. And particularly when we think about and talk about stress in the workplace, which we can dive into more, but we see that we have these really unhealthy levels of stress, extremely high levels of stress all the time. 76% of companies, the CDC had a report that said 76% of companies see stress as the number one workplace hazard for their employees, more than obesity, more than smoking. And so when we think about that and we say, okay, going back to hacking the mind and the body, if we can get in front of that stress and just work with it, it's not that we want it to go away, but we want to be able to work with it. We want our employees to be able to pause and to notice when their stress is in the red zone, if you will, and what they can do about that to be more proactive and be more present in their work and their engagement in the workplace.
Okay, so one of the things that you said early on there is that we have this system, right? And we're a system and work as a system, and I love that because I truly believe that work and employment is a social experience. I mean, we leave to socially interact with other people, and that means that they're part of our lives. And so this whole system interweaves together, yet we have ourselves individually and our bodies and our brains, and that's a system and how they work together. So work can create stress in people, and obviously every individual has the opportunity to decide if they get stressed or not. So how do we reduce that stress in a business system? Does it start with the individual, or like if you were to go in and work with a company and try to help reduce the amount of stress within that organization, what are some things that you would do? Like, how would you practice mindfulness with an individual?
I actually did this morning with one of my clients.
Perfect.
So my client has come in. She is a brilliant, powerful woman. Like, she has her master's, multiple degrees. She's built businesses. She has a family. I mean, she's just a really impeccable person. But she's recently has just kind of lost all of who she is, right? And in going into like what Anna was talking about with stress, is her go-to is I'm stressed. And the words stress and overwhelmed are really interesting. Kind of, they light me up when I hear people say that, because it's typically like you saying, I have so many negative emotions that I refuse to deal with, so I'm going to cloud them all into this ball of stress. Yeah. And so when somebody says that they're overwhelmed, it's like, wow, well, what led you to be overwhelmed? And they can't even pinpoint it. Never can they pinpoint it. There's a lot of things going on. So what you're saying is that multiple things have happened that have caused major emotional triggers or responses, and you neglected each one of those responses, and now it's led to an entire cloud of overwhelming feelings, right? So the idea would be, when you have a client or a employee that is stressed, is to get down to the root of what all emotions are inside of that stress. It's not just one. It's not just anger. It's anger, it's inadequacy, it's jealousy, it's fear, and fear has so many entities of fear, right? And so if you can, for me, what I would do is I would say, well, talking to her about stress, it'd say, well, what's inside of that stress? Like, what's led you to feel overwhelmed? Let's talk about each and every single one of those things, and then get down to the layer underneath that, and then the layer underneath that. And so that's really where the conversation for me starts. Is it doesn't stop with finding out someone's overwhelmed. It starts with finding out they're overwhelmed, and then trying to dig down into the layers to understand where the very first emotion started, and then how it snowballed into that feeling.
So what's the difference between mindfulness and being a therapist? Because it's like, that's where my mind is going right now. Yeah. You're finding the heart of it, which is what Anna talked about as well. Like, what's the difference?
I know, Anna, what do you think?
So there's a huge difference, and I love that question, and I love answering that question even when it's not asked, so I'm glad that you asked it. There is a distinct difference between the two, and the way that I like to phrase it is we use the word container. Like, you put your leftovers in a container, a good solid container that holds, so you don't get any leftovers in your backpack or your briefcase or whatever. That is what a mindfulness professional or a mindfulness course does. Is it just provides a container for you to experience whatever you need to experience. And so you are, we can talk about a formal mindfulness practice of a sitting meditation where you're just paying attention to your breath, and you're letting your thoughts and your emotions and your sensations just kind of pass through in the periphery. You're not attaching to anything, you're not labeling it, you're not judging it, you're not reacting to it. You're just saying, okay, here's a bunch of stuff that's happening right now, but I'm just focusing on my breath. So that has nothing to do with another person trying to fix you or give you answers or solutions. And that's a therapeutic model and even, in the healthcare setting, we go to the healthcare professional who is trained and certified and has the, the prescription pad and the x-ray machines and the whatever else. When you're practicing mindfulness, no one knows you better than you. You are the only person that can really tune into what's going on. If I am fully present in this moment, I see and feel everything that's happening in my mind and body from moment to moment to moment. And so no matter what I do or how often I'm talking to you or engaging with you, if you're my therapist, you're never going to be able to have access to what I have access to. And so as a mindfulness professional, it's our job to empower people to say, here, I'm just going to hold the container. You can be as messy as you need to inside of it. Experience your stress, experience your overwhelm, experience your pain. And I'm just going to let you look at it. I'm just going to make you feel sort of safe and that this space can be, the space can be a place for you to kind of explore a lot of that. And it's interesting when we talk about stress, because we, and I would say globally, are kind of in this place of stress has become chronic in a lot of ways. Stress is not a bad thing, but because we experience it as chronic stress and burnout so often, it is that word has gained a negative connotation, like stress, so it's like, obesity, stress, like all these bad things, right? Stress is what keeps us alive. It's what keeps us motivated and going. We need it. It's valuable. Positive stress is called eustress, but we are so often in the distress side of the spectrum. And so that's really when we start to see people say, I've got this stress and it's interfering with my work. It's interfering with my life. I got to get rid of it, right? But that's not what we're doing when we're practicing mindfulness. Instead of turning away from the things we don't like, which is oftentimes like what Adrian was saying earlier, when you're reaching for something in the pantry, what are you doing, right? Like what are you running away from, or what are you running towards? And so when we practice mindfulness, we're just pausing. We're saying we're not running from anything. We're just seeing what's here. Like what is the felt experience of anxiety and stress?
Okay. Not try to band-aid it.
Yeah, what is it? And we're just looking at it curiously. And the interesting thing is that when you practice that way versus a therapeutic setting where you're sort of receiving answers and solutions and insight from someone else, when you practice mindfulness, whether it's in a group setting with guided by a professional or just with an app by yourself in your car, you are actually shifting the part of your brain that you're using. You are shifting from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex, and the prefrontal cortex is the wise mind. It's the calm mind, and that's where you tap into creativity and innovation and all sorts of things, that curiosity and exploration. And so that's good for you as a person, right? Just in your life. But when we talk about the workplace, right? Like that's where we want people to be all the time. It's like it's problem solving and innovating and being creative and contributing and taking risks. And you can't do that if your strongest muscle in your brain is your amygdala, right? Because that's the part of the brain that's scanning for threats and risk assessing and all of that. And that is the complete opposite of what we want from people in the workplace.
Okay, so in its simplest form, how do you practice it? And I mean, one of the things that we've kind of explored in the past is you can do it at any moment. You can do it while you're driving in the car. You can just take a minute. You can do the Breathe app on your watch. I mean, there's lots of different ways you can practice it. But like to really dumb it down, how can somebody practice mindfulness?
Yeah. So the simplest way that I can explain it, because there are so many ways that it can be interpreted, so many formal and informal practices that you can do. But the simplest thing, kind of the formula that is behind all of it, is you are finding an anchor, is what we call it, finding an anchor that exists only in the present moment. So that can be the breath, because you're never breathing in the past, you're never breathing in the future. That keeps you present, right? Then you can use something else. You can use the scent of a candle. You can use the flame of a candle.
The scent of Adrian's tea.
Exactly. You can use the scent of your tea. Yeah.
It's true. I do sniff my tea a lot in meditation. I didn't even recognize that till now. But
yeah, you can use really anything that engages one of your five senses. Okay, so you really want to focus on one sense that is a felt experience right here in the moment, because that is what you're doing. Is you're staying out of the past and you're staying out of the future, and you're just landing now, and you stay here now and now and now and now, and that's all you're doing. There's no other goal other than just I will not leave this present moment. But inevitably you're going to. And so when the mind wanders, or when you start to pay attention to something else, that's the practice, is just, okay, I'm noticing, mind is wandering, I feel pain, there's an emotion, whatever it is that comes up, but you're constantly saying, I'm coming back to my anchor. And that's it. That's all there is to it, is just, it's me and my anchor. And I stay here for a predetermined amount of time, whether that's 2 minutes or 2 hours or anything in between, really doesn't matter. But it goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that when you are simply being and not doing anything, not trying to accomplish anything, you're just being in this space of curiosity, of like, okay, I'm focusing on this anchor and kind of letting everything else come up, and I'm watching it, right? But I'm not reacting to it, I'm not grasping it. That's that brain difference that I was talking about, is you're really building the muscle of your prefrontal cortex. And so over time, the simple practice of just, it's me and my anchor, I'm staying with my anchor, and then whenever I get distracted by something else, I just gently, without judgment, bring myself back to that anchor. You are literally building the density in that part of your brain that leads you to be more creative and those sorts of things. So you can do that while you're driving. You can focus on the feeling of the steering wheel under your fingertips. Or you can listen to the sound of the engine or something. If it's something that's a little more subtle, sometimes that's helpful. The breath is a great one. That's one I often recommend, because it's always, always, always with you, and it only exists in the present moment. But really, you can use anything. Washing dishes, listening to the sound of the water, anything. But it's just you and that anchor, and let everything else just kind of be in the periphery.
Cool. I had a question, but I was present in that moment. I forgot it. No, just kidding.
Don't judge yourself.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, like, everything you said is so powerful, and is like, to me, I relate to that. I absorb that, I live in it, I embody it. I would say that for most people, though, trying to get into mindfulness, all of that, as incredibly powerfully and smart and like articulate as you said it, sometimes they're like, but what's the point? Mm-hmm. Like, so for me, I like to, and I actually have an analogy out of this book that I'm reading, The Organized Mind, that's really cool, and that helps me to explain to my clients, like, really, when you talk about your mind is a super old house. And when most people think about transforming mentally, spiritually, or in a mindful setting, they think about taking that old house and making it new and clean and perfect. But really, the building of the house is every day you're replacing one floor, one nail, one wall, one thing. And then you start working through this and you start making moves, but maybe one day you have this old water heater and you don't need that anymore because you got this brand new water heater downstairs, but you think, well, I'll just keep it anyways because what if, right? Well, then a couple of years goes down the road and you've built all these things around the house, and all of a sudden you need to get into your pipes, but you can't because that old water heater is sitting there. And instead of taking that water heater out and saying, this doesn't serve me anymore, you just decide to build the pipes up and around and up into the attic. But then a couple years from there, it gets really cold and your attic freezes. And so now you've got issues with your pipes. And so constantly reevaluating and pivoting and saying, like, here are the neural pathways I've created, and here's the path that I'm on. And here are some things that in the past I thought I needed to hold on to emotionally, but that don't really serve me. That to me is what happens in my mindfulness. And I think helps people understand a little bit of a navigation as far as, okay, I'm someone who does not meditate. I don't pray. I don't do any of these things. How do I get the benefits of mindfulness? And is there even any purpose? What's the point? What am I supposed to feel? I did it for a week straight and nothing happened. Though that's what I get most of the time, right? Sometimes I even get people that are like, that's voodoo, right? It's just like there are levels of people and where they fall into mindfulness. And sometimes mindfulness, because there's no quantification, is something that I find with my clients who are really logical, cannot attach to. And so I'm constantly, and I say this for you especially, because I'd love to know if you have any feedback for me, but whenever they're in this space where they're not interested in that at all, it's not something that even makes sense to them, trying to find new navigations into, well, ultimately this is where you need to be, and whether you can quantify the results of it or not, this is what holds you back, right? And so maybe I'm not in that space yet, but always trying to find that next move.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right, that it is a very abstract thing, and it has in some circles, I think our first conversation, you were like, okay, so new agey, woo-woo, hippie stuff, right? Like, what is this? And that is so much, again, Tim Ferriss, I think, said, meditation has a branding problem, right? And it does, it definitely does. Mindfulness and meditation have a branding problem. And so that's why I like to relate it to the physical of, like, when you're working out, you want to have some really good pecs, right? So you're going to look at yourself in the mirror over time, you're going to measure that. You can't see your brain doing that, but essentially that's what's happening when you're practicing mindfulness. mindfulness is you are building a muscle. And that takes time. No one expects to go to we all expect to go to the gym once and see huge results, right? But then when we get real, we know that that's not how it works. And so if we can kind of make that connection of there's some real things that are happening in this muscle that is inside your skull, just like any other muscle. If you focus on it, it will grow. If you neglect it, then it will atrophy.
Okay, so I want to explore that comment a little bit more, right? The hippie granola side of like health and wellness and yoga versus like the scientific background of mindfulness and the research that you guys have done. How do we change the branding, and how do you recommend human resource professionals go to the CFO or to the controller and say, hey, I want to bring in mindfulness as our new health and wellness program? How do they share the result of what can happen without it coming across as like really hippie?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And the first thing that I would say is mindfulness, in my opinion, is a means to a different end in most cases. I know in my life, personally and professionally, it has enabled me to do lots of other things, to balance grad school and building a business and starting a TEDx event, and you know what I mean? Like, it's helped me to do other things and just kind of maintain, sanity, if you will. And so I think I don't know that I would necessarily recommend that a mindfulness program replace anything that's currently happening within health and wellness in a corporate space. I think it's something that can come in and provide an additional set of supports and tools and resources for other types of employee wellness things that are already going on. We certainly don't want to neglect, the financial wellness and the physical health and those sorts of things, but mindfulness can really come in and enhance those pretty significantly. And there, it's interesting. Like I said, the history of mindfulness in the United States really came from this stress reduction for people with chronic pain and fibromyalgia and some of these like chronic illnesses that really can be quite debilitating. But those same concepts over the last probably 10 or 15 years, there have been thousands of research studies that have started to be published outside of that setting. And some really interesting ones. There was one in the Journal of Management in 2016 that demonstrated all of the workplace or some of the workplace setting type benefits that you can see, around team cohesion and productivity and creativity, even when it comes to like diversity and inclusion, being able to create a different more resilient climate of, okay, we're going to try and build these resilient teams and try and open up these conversations that might be kind of tough to work with. And so, looking at some of that research and being able to bring in some of that research as an HR professional so that you can say, this is a very scientific, research-based, evidence-based practice that can serve us in these other ways, right? Like, who's interested in mindfulness for its own sake? Not very many people, but our company's interested in lowering healthcare costs, lowering absenteeism and presenteeism, and increasing productivity and creativity and those sorts of things. Of course, that's what we're here for, right? And especially in this climate of rapidly changing corporate space, technology companies and others that just have to adapt constantly, really quickly, thinking of ways that we can bring in mindfulness. There was actually a study, I think it was PricewaterhouseCoopers, published a study that said they looked at a set of companies that had instituted mindfulness programs and some of these outcomes, and they had measured that for every dollar they invested, they were getting $2.30 of benefit in some of those things, of lowered costs and in other ways, and being able to, retention and those kinds of things. So there's definitely, I think, for people who are not as familiar with the space and not as familiar with what's been going on in academia and otherwise, don't be discouraged, I guess. There's plenty of research out there. It just takes a little bit of time to find.
What does it take to become certified? Do you have to be certified to do mindfulness? I mean, as you're talking about this, I'm thinking maybe some of our listeners would have interest in becoming certified or taking their HR to a new level of focusing on these results and understanding mindfulness better. What's the education requirement? What's the certification look like? What's it take to get more people in the Silicon Slopes able to help promote mindfulness?
Yeah, so, and if you want to jump in here too, but just to give a little bit of background around that. So my training is through the University of Massachusetts Medical School, and they have a program, it's an 8-week program, and this is kind of the meat and potatoes of Mindfulness Utah. It's this 8-week program called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, MBSR, and that is the kind of the oldest evidence-based, structure that has been studied a lot in a lot of different settings with different populations, and so it's kind of the equivalent of a master's degree. It takes multiple courses over several years, and so there are certain types of certification that I definitely recommend, and in some other things that I've some writing and things that I've done, I always recommend that people look at mindfulness professionals with some skepticism, with a little bit of an analytical mind of, okay, well, what makes you a mindfulness professional? Just because you've been breathing your whole life, does that make you a mindfulness professional? Or because you're a yoga instructor, does that mean you're a mindfulness professional? I would argue no. I think there's a lot to mindfulness, particularly in terms of the research and the academic base to it, and looking at evidence-based practices versus, and there's nothing wrong with this, but, there's kind of the low-hanging fruit of download an app and try for 5 minutes a day, and that is a great entry point. But that does not necessarily mean if someone does that for a year or two that they are a mindfulness professional. So yes, there are tracks to get certified. There's an international accrediting body and different things like that. But there is, the mindfulness space has really kind of become saturated with a lot of different skilled people. And so I think if, as an HR professional, there are ways to be able to take courses, and there are apps, Headspace, Calm, a few others that people can download and kind of get a sense of what this is, and then maybe share it with their company. But as far as, if you're going to engage an outside consultant that's a mindfulness professional, I would be a little bit more skeptical.
For sure. So from someone who does not have a certification in mindfulness, mine was really based on my own self-destruction, finding my path of mindfulness, right? And then mostly just trial and error with my clients, planting seeds and helping them. And really that's not my job is not necessarily mindfulness, but it is, I'm so fascinated with it that it's something that I've incorporated. So I would just say that there, like you said, there are levels, right? Entry point as far as having an app and doing that. I think people are just knowing this based on nutrition and exercise. When somebody dives into something, they want to dive in head first as hard as they possibly can. That's what happened with my yoga certification. I had never done yoga, but maybe 3 times in my whole life. I was not a yogi. I was not mindful. I was not enlightened. And the reason I got into it was because I was in emotional turmoil. And so I thought, well, if I get my yoga certification, it will change everything, right? So I would just say that there are layers, and wherever you are, progression is key with everything. And so if you're at a place where you need to reach out to a professional, then yes, do your research for sure. Reach out to somebody who knows more about it than, I do. But at the same time, if you are somebody who has not even put your toe in the water, then it's probably not going and getting certifications. It's whatever level you're at right now, what is the next step for you to be a more mindful person? And for me, my next step might be getting a certification or just spending more time with you, right? and learning from those things. And so I think it's where everybody's at is the next step. And companies will be the same way. I mean, everybody's going to be on such a different place. And humans are driven by something very specific. So if somebody's doing mindfulness, it's probably not just because they heard about it. Whatever they're going through emotionally, they're trying to either get out of that or they've tried everything else, right? And so as long as they understand that there are those layers and that they'll need to be able to speak to all of them, then it's definitely something that can make sense.
Cool. So I'm a huge fan of Zappos. And fun fact, they only have one physical office inside their entire headquarters, and it's the office for a life coach. And that's where you can go and have personal conversations with this life coach and discuss issues that you're having and set your plans. And I'm curious, with mindfulness taking off, have you heard of any corporations that have hired a full-time mindfulness professional? Or are they just using consultants? But do you know of a full-time mindfulness employee at a company that's only helping their employees with that?
Yeah, in fact, when you look at the East and West Coasts, there's a pretty significant mindfulness movement underway. Companies like Google and Facebook and Salesforce and Starbucks and Ford and Kaiser Permanente and a lot of these big international companies, they've hired someone who is the head of mindfulness, and I think that's because they've seen, there's a big movement kind of in the venture capital space and a lot of these other really big innovators that have said, one of the reasons that I am successful is because I have this practice of clearing space in my mind and in my day to let, to be creative and to kind of let things go and to make sure that that I can refocus and re-engage from a place of, kind of driving my life, from a place of responding rather than reacting. And so it's an investment, obviously, like any other position. And so I think that's one of the things when we look at Silicon Slopes is it's exciting that we have the model of, Silicon Valley and some of these like Manhattan companies and others that have instituted these kinds of things. And from my perspective, it's from a place of we recognize that we want resilient employees. And we need resilient employees. And so we're going to look for them, right? We're going to try and bring them in and interview and hire the right people. But then once they get here, we recognize that's not static either. Like our company's going to change. We're going to have turnover. People are going to shift into different positions. And so we need to give them tools. And mindfulness is a great one to be able to create a resilient workforce that can handle change and that can handle difficulties, whether it's personal or professional. So it's exciting to see. And I know, with some smaller startups or companies like that, it might be a little more of a challenge to convince the C-suite or the board that that's an investment worthwhile. But like I said, there's plenty of research to show that it is.
Okay, cool. All right, so I'm an HR professional and I'm thinking this is awesome. I want to do it. I might even want to replace one of my existing health and wellness programs. You mentioned that it could just augment it, which I think is great as well. My question and my mind immediately goes to, how do I get this covered by insurance? And is it covered by insurance? Like, will medical coverage with mental health and wellness, is mindfulness included in there? So I guess my question is, what are insurance companies doing to cover this? Is there coverage right now? If a company wanted to bring you in, could you do it through an insurance company? Or where are we at right now with legislation and the way that that's all set up?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, yoga, meditation, a lot of these integrative health practices that are trying to be more incorporated into Western medicine and those sorts of things. They're active topics in terms of legislation and being able to be covered through insurance. Some things like massage therapy and things like that have made their way in. Because like I said, a lot of the research around mindfulness has been within pretty specific populations within the healthcare setting. I don't think that there's enough of a base yet to really say, okay, here are the outcomes that we can demonstrate within a workplace setting that yoga has, X, Y, and Z benefit to the, and it will save you this amount of money, that kind of thing. And so I am not currently aware of anything, at least within the Utah scope, which is my kind of my work area. I'm not aware of insurance companies that are covering this. There's a lot of therapists that are starting to be trained in mindfulness-based stress reduction and other types of mindfulness practices and courses. And so probably right now, if an HR professional is like, yes, I love this, how do we start integrating? I would say look at an E or EAP program and see if you can connect with companies or therapists who are trained in mindfulness, or have a conversation and see if you can start pushing them in that direction. And again, I'm not an HR professional, so there's a lot of stuff there that I don't know and a lot of nuances that I'm not aware of. But I would say I feel pretty confident that in the next 10, 15 years, this sort of thing will be covered by insurance. It'll be very accessible through EAP. It'll be something that, as when you go to the doctor, or you go to other healthcare professionals, they're already starting to recommend, practicing on your own, but being able to have these things covered by HSA dollars and insurance, I think isn't too far off.
Yeah. I mean, we take HSA and FSA, but there's a lot of like loopholes and stuff with that, but yeah, I think you're right. I don't know of any insurance company that provides really any resources like that. Even with functional medicine doctors, it's really difficult when my clients come to me and ask referrals for different doctors to be able to find a functional medicine doctor that takes insurance for certain things as well.
Yeah, but I would say if there is one, and I don't know if I should say this, but I would say Select Health is probably not that far away from doing something like this. There's been this huge, Intermountain Healthcare has put millions of dollars behind a new movement around the social determinants of health and understanding what are these things outside of your physical ailments, the things that take you to the hospital or take you to the doctor. Like, what are the things that exist in your environment, in your relationships, in those sorts of things that are the step ahead, kind of that systems thinking perspective that we were talking about earlier. And so they, like I said, they've invested multiple millions of dollars in this initiative that's going to exist over the next few years. And so I think as some of that starts to trickle into to the Utah space, and there's some research around that, I would think Utah-based companies, Select Health in particular, because they're so closely connected, would probably pick it up. So fingers crossed.
And I think like as companies start to, it's interesting because wellness in the workplace is really meant to drive productivity in their employees, but really there's so many other issues like addiction and suicide that should be looked at, because a lot of times, and I actually have somebody I want to introduce you to. His name is James Hadlock. If you don't already know him,
James is a great friend of the Disrupt program.
Okay, so you already know. So what he talks about is like there's just so many awesome people that suffer from addiction, and it's like those might be your most productive or most creative people, right? But that's really where mindfulness to me is going to make the biggest impact as far as where HR comes in, because you're talking about being able to create mindfulness for somebody who already is creative. Those people that are creative and productive, they're the people you never see it coming, right? Those are the people that really need the mindfulness the most, because they're suffering from whatever it is that they're not able to deal with these stressors, and so that it gets to that point of suicide or addiction. And so I think that's where you're going to see the biggest difference as far as like boosting productivity, of course, right? But I don't know, maybe they're just not asking the right questions.
I guess we'll find out, huh?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, if you're interested in getting it right now, getting mindfulness in your company, I mean, we can always start with Mindfulness Utah or with Master Metabolic, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we know where to get hit the ground running. So thank you guys so very much for your time. Anna, Adrian, you guys have been great, and this has been super informative. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you guys.